Hi everyone, we're Mimicker, here to introduce all kinds of knowledge, even the stuff we didn't know about. Welcome. Today, we're really digging into something central to our digital world. The life, the reality of the digital creator. I mean, there's such a key figure now in the 21st century, but underneath the surface, there's this constant, pretty fundamental tug of war going on.
Yeah, it's a real tension.
On one side, you've got, the drive for authentic expression, for creativity, and on the other, it's the cold, hard logic of the platforms themselves. All about the metrics.
And that tension, that conflict, that's really what we're focusing on in this deep dive. Our goal here is to kind of break down how this constant measurement, the real-time tracking of how content performs, how it actually reshapes who a creator feels they are, their identity, and what they end up making.
Right.
It pushes them towards becoming what some sources call the algorithmic self. Basically, an identity that's always being defined, always being tweaked inside this relentless feedback loop driven entirely by data.
It really is a paradox, isn't it? Because you hear so much hype about the creator economy. It's pitched as this amazing democratizing force. And the numbers look huge, like Goldman Sachs is predicting massive growth still.
Yeah.
Sounds like this wide open field of opportunity.
Well, it is an opportunity, but maybe not in the way it's often sold. It provides an opportunity for a very specific kind of digital work. The barrier to starting is low, sure, and that's the democratic promise, but actually making it sustainable, that path is incredibly narrow.
Okay.
So we need to kind of look beyond that shiny promise and see the hidden pressures, the ones that can genuinely push creators towards burnout, towards collapse even. And it often boils down to creative value getting reduced almost entirely to numbers, views, subs, click-through rates, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that a bit more. When we talk about creators, the word entrepreneur gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
But if their whole livelihood, their visibility, is basically controlled by a handful of giant tech platforms, are they really independent? Or is it more like a new kind of digital labor system?
That's really the core question, isn't it? They're operating within a structure that academics often term platform capitalism. It's this economic model where these huge digital companies use tech to basically mediate everything, extract data constantly, and build up their own capital.
Right.
So creators become this new form of digital labor. They're working within a system that's fundamentally set up to pull value out for the platforms, first and foremost.
So if the platform is the capitalist entity and the content is kind of the product, what's the main raw material they're pulling out?
It's data, your data. I mean, the audience's interaction data. Every single click you make, every second you watch, every comment, it's all scooped up by the platform, and typically without any direct compensation going back to the person who made the content, the creator. The platforms then use all that data for hyper-targeted ads, making huge profits, while the creators themselves often face, pretty extreme precarity.
And there are stats that really highlight that precarity, aren't there? What do the sources say about the actual odds of making a real living from this?
It's pretty brutal, honestly. The numbers suggest only a tiny, tiny fraction, we're talking something like 0.1% of creators, can actually earn a proper living wage just from their channel revenue alone. So it's not this thriving middle class of creators. It's more like a hyper-concentrated group at the very top. Makes the whole creator economy label sound a bit more like the gig economy, really.
Yeah, absolutely. The platforms are acting like what some call lean platforms, right? They basically push all the costs, the creative risk, the production effort, the mental load onto the individual creator.
Precisely. And this whole situation gets amplified by something called network effects. That's the idea that the more people use a platform, the more valuable it becomes for everyone else, which, lets a few giants get really dominant really fast.
Creates monopolies, essentially.
Right. And once they have that dominance, they have enormous power. They can just set the rules, change the algorithms whenever they want, and that dictates who succeeds. It creates this dependency that's almost impossible for creators to escape.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Once a platform has that kind of power, how does the algorithm actually work as this, all-powerful gatekeeper?
Yeah.
Deciding which content gets seen and which just vanishes?
Well, the crucial thing to understand is that the algorithm isn't neutral. It's not just some objective tool. It's actively enforcing the platform's main business goal, which is usually maximizing the time users spend on the site, maximizing engagement.
Keeping eyeballs glued.
Exactly. So the algorithm doesn't just distribute content fairly. It actively pulls the stuff its models predict users will engage with the most. And this forces creators fundamentally to shift from just creating what they want to creating for the algorithm.
So the algorithm basically writes a kind of behavioral script for them. What are the main metrics, the key performance indicators, the KPIs that creators feel they have to chase?
There are generally 4 big ones. First, you've got the very top of the funnel, click-through rate, or CTR. That's all about how tempting your title and thumbnail are. If people aren't clicking, the algorithm pretty much assumes the content isn't interesting and just throttles its reach right away.
That's pure attention grabbing, that get the click no matter what sometimes.
Pretty much. Then, okay, once they click, the second metric is absolutely vital. Watch time and audience retention. These are seen as the core measures of whether people are actually satisfied. If viewers bail out in the first, say, 30 seconds, the algorithm reads that as bad content and basically kills its potential reach.
And it's not just about surviving that first minute, is it? The algorithm wants more signals, right? Like proof that it resonates with the community.
It absolutely does. Which brings us to the third category, engagement signals. We're talking likes, comments, shares, saves, all those things that show people are connecting with it, that it's sparking conversation. That provides really valuable data too.
And the fourth.
And finally, maybe the most important one for the platform's business model, session time. Does your video not only keep people watching your video, but does it also lead them to watch more videos on the platform afterwards? Like, does it start a binge watching session? Channels that consistently do that, they get heavily favored.
Wow. Listening to that, the whole analytics dashboard sounds less like a helpful tool for artists and, I don't know, more like a supervisor's checklist in a factory.
That's a really good way to put it. It effectively becomes this automated management system where your success is tied directly to these numbers you can see changing in real time. The sources we looked at use this powerful analogy. The analytics dashboard is the digital incarnation of the modern factory foreman's clipboard. Creators aren't just getting feedback, they're interpreting every dip in views as a negative performance review. And that pressure forces them towards, well, self-censorship maybe, aligning everything they do with maximizing those engagement numbers.
So what does all that constant, intense algorithmic judgment do to a creator's actual mental state? I mean, when your sense of worth gets tangled up with those incredibly volatile numbers, the psychological pressure must just be immense.
It leads to something we can call data anxiety, and it's really insidious. There's a clear parallel drawn with appearance anxiety in some ways. Creators find themselves constantly doing this upward social comparison, scrolling, seeing the huge numbers their peers are getting, and it just triggers these intense feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt about their own work.
And the platform kind of reinforces that anxiety, doesn't it?
Yep.
Because it frames the whole thing as objective, like the numbers don't lie.
Exactly. That's what makes the anxiety so hard to push back against. The algorithm standards, its judgments, they're presented as these objective, data-driven truths. The story is always, oh, the algorithm just follows what the audience wants.
Okay.
So if your video tanks, the conclusion feels purely logical, almost mathematical. The audience didn't like it. And trying to question the data, that feels like you're questioning the audience itself, which is just an incredibly difficult thing for a creator to do psychologically.
Let's talk about that duality you mentioned with the metrics. How they can be this source of incredible validation 1 minute and then just crushing self-doubt the next.
Yeah, the creator's identity gets completely fused with these numbers. A high view count feels like validation. Okay, I'm relevant, people care. But then a sudden drop translates immediately to, oh God, I'm becoming irrelevant. Same with audience retention. If it's strong, you feel, yes, I'm charismatic, I can hold attention. But if people are clicking away fast, the anxiety spirals, my storytelling is boring, I'm failing. So creators are living in this constant state of potential validation and potential rejection, sometimes swinging back and forth multiple times a day.
That kind of emotional roller coaster sounds absolutely exhausting. And this burnout we hear so much about. It's not just about people being bad at managing their time, is it? It sounds more systemic.
Oh, absolutely not. It's crucial we see burnout here as, like, an industrial disease that's baked into the platform's design. It's not a personal failing. Creators are stuck on what's called the algorithmic treadmill.
An algorithmic treadmill.
Yeah. Because of that financial precarity we talked about, taking a break, resting, that often feels like a luxury they just can't afford. If you stop uploading, you risk immediately losing your visibility in the algorithm, losing income. The whole system structurally incentivizes constant production, basically overwork.
And that pressure, that overwork, it leads directly to this huge creative dilemma, doesn't it? Do you chase the trends, make what the algorithm seems to want, even if it feels inauthentic? Or do you stick to your artistic vision and risk just fading into obscurity?
It's this constant agonizing negotiation. And that pressure often leads down a slippery slope towards, well, inauthenticity. You see content becoming really formulaic. People start overusing certain editing techniques like jump cuts, maybe not because it serves the story, but just because it's perceived as algorithm friendly.
Right.
Creation stops being purely about expression and becomes more about reverse engineering what worked last week, trying to replicate that success.
You mentioned clickbait earlier, too, like deliberately creating an information gap just to boost that crucial CTR metric. How does that whole tension play out with the audience? Because audiences always say they crave authenticity above all else.
Ah, yes. That brings us right to the authenticity paradox. The irony is, the algorithm often rewards a performance of authenticity. For instance, sharing really vulnerable moments, deep personal struggles. That kind of content often drives really high engagement. Likes, comments, shares go up.
So the demand for authenticity actually incentivizes faking it.
In a way, yes. The audience demands authenticity. But the market mechanics, the algorithm, ensures that the content perceived as most authentic is often the content that's been most skillfully optimized for platform performance.
So the more authenticity gets demanded and measured, the more likely it is to become just another calculated performance.
Exactly. It's the ultimate kind of soul-crushing compromise. And this compromise can do real damage to the creator's relationship with their audience, which is often built on what's called a parasocial contract, or PSR.
Okay, maybe quickly define that parasocial relationship for anyone listening who isn't familiar.
Sure. So the PSR is basically this one-sided psychological bond that the audience forms with the creator. Because platforms are designed for intimacy, creators talking directly to the camera, sharing personal details, the audience starts to feel like they actually know the creator, like they're a friend or at least an acquaintance.
Right, that sense of connection.
Yeah. So the audience gives their attention, their data, and in return, they kind of expect the creator to stay that authentic person they first connected with, to uphold the values they perceive the creator represents.
So where does that emotional contract break down? When do we see those big community backlashes against creators?
It typically happens when creators are forced into making what feel like cold, hard business decisions that clash directly with those perceived intimate values. Think about introducing paywalls, or taking on controversial sponsorships, or even making staffing changes that affect the content. The Watcher Entertainment Channel case study is a famous example of this.
Oh, right.
When those things happen, the audience can feel this really deep sense of, personal betrayal. It feels like the creators use that emotional connection, that parasocial bond, just to justify a business move.
So the audience feels like they were used, essentially. Like the creator chose the metrics, the business, over the authentic community connection. Puts the creator in a truly impossible position, doesn't it? They need that bond to build an audience and succeed financially. But the very business actions needed to scale often end up shattering that bond.
It's the fundamental catch-22 of the system. And the solution? Well, it probably doesn't lie just in telling creators to be more resilient. It likely requires systemic changes to shift the underlying incentives.
Okay, so let's talk about takeaways. What's actionable here? Starting with the creators themselves, how can they maybe build up some psychological defenses against this algorithmic treadmill?
Well, first, it's about consciously trying to build some protective psychological walls, actively working to decouple your sense of self-worth from those incredibly volatile metrics. Maybe pursuing passion projects just for the intrinsic joy of it, completely separate from tracking any performance data.
And what about the way they structure their audience, their support base?
There's a potential strategy in shifting focus. Instead of relentlessly chasing a massive, anonymous audience, maybe concentrate on cultivating a smaller but deeply loyal community. Those strong community ties tend to be much more resilient to the algorithm's unpredictable swings, and they can offer a safer psychological space, too.
And what about when those difficult business changes do need to happen, like adding a paid tier or something?
Transparency seems absolutely key there. When you have to make those tough transitions, communicate really openly, explain the why behind it, be honest about the economic realities, framing it as a business necessity for survival, rather than letting it feel like an emotional shock or a betrayal, can help mitigate some of that backlash.
Makes sense. And finally, what about the platforms themselves, the architects of this whole system? What could they do to maybe foster a healthier, more sustainable digital space?
Well, fundamentally, they need to look at increasing algorithmic transparency and stability, reducing those huge unannounced algorithm shifts that can just decimate a creator's income overnight. That would go a long way towards reducing anxiety.
right? Predictability matters.
Hugely. And maybe more importantly, they need to actively diversify how creators can actually make money. Things like better subscription tools, direct payment options, ways to help build a viable creator middle class. That would reduce the relentless pressure to constantly chase viral hits just to survive.
They need to acknowledge that burnout isn't just an individual problem, it's kind of a feature of the design.
Exactly. They need to invest in real, tangible creator well-being resources. Move beyond just PR statements and actually provide meaningful mental health support, acknowledging the kind of, well, industrial disease their systems have helped create.
And it's been fascinating. This deep dive really shows how the health of this whole creator economy directly impacts the health of our wider digital culture.
Yeah.
I mean, if the people telling the stories, sharing the knowledge, making the art online are constantly exhausted and forced into just optimizing for clicks, we all end up losing something valuable.
Absolutely. And that maybe leads us to a final provocative thought for you to chew on. If this system keeps quantifying, optimizing, and ultimately exhausting its most creative participants, what happens to the digital landscape we all share? It risks becoming increasingly monotonous, formulaic, maybe even soulless. So this isn't just about the creator's well-being, it's really about the future vitality of our shared digital public sphere.
That's a really powerful note to end on. Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you enjoyed our content, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and turn on the notification bell.